we want to be mindful around what our focus is here at Cisco from also the importance of sponsorship, because we know there's a big connection between being mentor ready, being mentee ready, and how they can lead to wonderful things with sponsorship. And we also want to ensure that we have the opportunity to have a panel discussion. So not only will you get to hear from our wonderful speakers, we'll have an opportunity to answer many of the questions that all of you have asked through the registration process. I think we have about 30 or so questions. I'm not going to lie, we're not going to get through all of those, but we're going to get through a few of them that we felt resonate with today's topics. We're then going to open it up for questions in the room and obviously questions in the audience from an online perspective. Now, I know we're all eager to hear from the speakers, but before we jump and dive into that, I just want to remind everybody that at Cisco, what are we all about? Full spectrum diversity, right? Ensuring that everyone that walks through our doors can be felt seen, respected, heard, and valued. Full spectrum diversity, that means generation, that means ethnicity, that means diversity of thought, diversity from a strengths perspective, diversity from just being able to recognize each and every person in this room and outside of this room as well. And so I'm super excited to be here. I'm excited to have this conversation. I will join you all shortly again in the panel discussion. But with that, I would like to introduce Christine, the co-lead for our WISE ERO, to share a little bit more about the wonderful employer resource organization.
So I'd like to also just take a moment also to thank the Office of Inclusion and Collaboration for helping us, sponsor and host this event. Without them, having this collaboration is really important, as Maria has mentioned. So my name is Christine Antons. I am one of the global co-leads for WISE. I'm super excited for the event today, and I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about WISE for those of you who don't know. We are an ERO who is passionately focused on developing, accelerating, and retaining women in STEM careers. We have pillars that focus on technical development, leadership training, volunteering, and giving back to the community, as well as, networking events for us to all network with each other. In addition to the WISE San Jose chapter that is here in the room with us, we definitely want to shout out to the WISE LATAM chapter as well as RTP. So we're so excited to have you guys join us for today's event. So in addition to WISE hosting the event, we are also hosting it with MFI. So I'd like to introduce Jamie, one of the global leads for MFI, and have him tell you a little bit more about MFI before we bring up our guest speakers. Jamie?
Hey, everybody. So just quickly to talk about MFI. So again, I want to reiterate, this is awesome to have this collaboration with the OIC office, but also with WISE and WIT. It's fantastic that hopefully this is the first of many more, but to have a group like this together and awesome speakers to warrant that conversation is really fantastic. So first off, MFI is a network within the OIC community. We have very aligned goals with the OIC office as well as WISE in terms of really using the creative powers of unlocking creativity, innovation via a diverse set of backgrounds, experiences, personalities, and a whole spectrum of what people can bring to their work each day. Now, the piece of it that MFI tries to target is bringing that group of people, which is men predominantly, but also ones that look a lot like me, who haven't been a part of a lot of those inclusive or diverse conversations in the past. And this is not about saying, oh, we feel bad that we're not part of the conversation, but really it's a call to action to say, stop sitting on the sidelines, get involved, start driving some of that change, and make this a partnership so we can actually drive some of those efforts more effectively. So with that, this is a fantastic topic for this mixed group. We will say that, look, there's no silver bullet to driving inclusion and collaboration in any organization. However, this piece of mentorship, sponsorship, is a very critical element to helping to drive that. And so while this is an advanced form of where we want to get to, because being in a place to mentor, to advise, hopefully this is prompting some feelings, prompting a conversation that people want to get involved, work on that self-development, be more involved in these types of conversations so we can get to some of the kind of advanced levels that our speakers are going to bring to today. So with that, I'd love to introduce our two speakers who are both the co-authors of the book Athena Rising, How and Why Men Should Mentor Women. Dr. Brad Johnson, PhD, is professor of psychology in the Department of Leadership, Ethics, and Law at the United States Naval Academy, and a faculty associate in the Graduate School of Education at Johns Hopkins University. A clinical psychologist and former lieutenant commander in the Navy's Medical Service Corps, Dr. Johnson served as a psychologist at Bethesda Naval Hospital and Medical Clinic at Pearl Harbor, where he's division head for psychology. He's a fellow of the American Psychological Association and recipient of the Johns Hopkins University Teaching Excellence Award. Served as chair for the American Psychological Association's Ethics Committee and as president of the Society for Military Psychology. Dr. Johnson is author of more than 100 journal articles and book chapters, many on the topics of mentoring, and 12 books in the area of mentoring, professional ethics, and counseling. Dr. David Smith, PhD, is an associate professor of sociology in the Department of National Security Affairs at the United States Naval War College. Former Navy pilot, Dr. Smith led diverse organizations of women and men, culminating in command of a squadron in combat, and flew over more than 3,000 hours over 30 years, including combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. As a sociologist trained in military sociology and social psychology, he focused his research in gender, work, and family issues, including gender bias in performance evaluations, dual career families, military families, women in the military, and retention of women. Dr. Smith is the author of numerous journal articles and book chapters, many on the topic of gender and the workplace. So, very long intros because you have a lot of accomplishments, and that's fantastic to have you here. So please join me in welcoming our two guest speakers.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Get some feedback. Stay away from that, maybe. Well, good afternoon. It's great to be here with you in a great room of what I see here, a lot of rising Athenas, as we like to say, and we have a small group of male allies, as we heard from Jamie today with MFI. And it's great to be here today to be with you to talk a little bit more in depth about some of the work that we've done, in particular if you're trying to approach mentoring and sponsoring and how you can be more deliberate and intentional in doing that. What are the expectations? What are the things that we can be doing as both mentees and as mentors, right? And how we can do that at both the individual level and then take that up at higher levels within our organization. As you heard, Brad and I have been working together, and we started doing this in 2014, in particular around Athena Rising, and we've really brought together our specialty areas in the research and the academic work that we've done, mine around gender work and family and sociology, and Brad's in mentoring relationships, in particular around clinical psychology, in trying to really address some of the workplace issues that we're seeing today and how, in many ways, the gender inequities have not been reduced over the last 20 years. Gender equality really hasn't progressed in the ways that we would like it to and as fast as we need it to. And then why that's really important and how we can change that. And one of the things is really how do we engage in this together, right? How can we bring it together and actually do it in a way that relates to leader development, to mentoring, and to professional relationships in the workplace that really help us to engage as employees and as leaders, right, in making a direct change there. So we're going to focus on that today. Brad and I get a chance to travel around the world now. We just got back from Europe talking and really do a lot of these keynotes and workshops. And I can tell you that this is a very riveting topic. And you don't really have to take our word for this, that you can also just ask our students.
Those are Dave's students, I just want to clarify.
They were yours. All right, we'll get started here.
So I want to just kind of jump into the, want to put a couple flags in the sand for what we're talking about. Wow, feedback's at me. All right. I think this might be my mic. Maybe we can change it out.
Or maybe we can turn that speaker maybe just a little bit.
Maybe different direction.
Okay,
great. And so I want to just talk about mentoring and then also say a couple things about sponsoring. And really what we're going to try and cover in 40 minutes is, how do you think about being a great mentee and how do you initiate these relationships? How do you seek out a sponsor? And then also want to share a little bit about what it looks like when it's done really well, the sponsoring and mentoring. So I want to share both of those with you in a pretty short amount of time. Start with mentoring. Many of you may have different ideas about what mentor relationships are. really, if you look at the literature on mentoring, there's some real consistency that this is a relationship, right? This is often an ongoing relationship, and great mentors tend to do two things. So two things you might want to be expecting in these relationships. Number one, I do want to push your career forward, and there are a number of functions that are really kind of career, right? I'm going to challenge you and push you forward and do the teaching and do the strategic networking. I want to really have your career soar, and I'm committed to that. But there's another part to mentor relationships where I really am interested in just you and how you're doing, and I check in. How's it going? How's work-life integration going? How's it for you to show up at Cisco here every day? I'm interested in the personal too, and I want you to thrive in both. So these are often more committed, long-term relationships, and I'm really kind of all in. Sponsoring, Cisco's doing a lot of terrific things right now around specifically, and sponsoring is really not necessarily a relationship that's ongoing. I'm just committed to pushing you forward for that next opportunity, right? I saw you do something. Wow, we ought to make sure we retain you. And by the way, there's a promotion coming up. I'm going to think of you for that. I'm going to actually introduce you to someone who could be strategic. I'm going to push you forward. In a perfect world, mentors do some of this, right? If I get to know you really well in a relationship, I'm probably going to be inclined to do some sponsoring. So, don't be surprised if a great mentor does some of this for you. It's not required. Sponsors, I can just pluck you out of the group and say, hey, you're a rock star. I'm going to push you forward. And it's wonderful when that happens. But don't be surprised if there's sometimes some overlap. A great sponsor for you may over time become a bit of a mentor. So anyway, don't be surprised when mentor and sponsor can blend together over time. I think it's wonderful when that happens. Right. But by the way, I just want to say in terms of outcomes, the outcomes are so clear right now. Part of the reason we're here talking to you right now is we find if you have a mentor, we just know you make more money. You get more promotions. You're more competent. You have more kind of fame in your profession. It just goes better for people that are well mentored. And, there's some similar evidence for sponsorship as well. So this is going to be good for you, and we want to talk about how to be strategic. Want to just kind of plant another flag in the sand. This is the very traditional model of mentoring, right? And some of us still maybe think about this. We call this the guru model. And it kind of goes like this. You come to me, and I will dispense wisdom. I'll tell you everything you need to know, and you don't need to talk to anybody but me. I'm the guru. And what we're finding is that's really unhelpful, and it's really outdated. What we're finding is it's much more helpful to have a constellation. This sort of broad network of people that are helping you. Great to have one or two sort of traditional mentors that are maybe, with you long term and kind of committed. Great. But there are also these mentors of the moment, right? People that you might encounter who just say, hey, I could help you with this very strategically. Or if I'm a great mentor, I'm going to be very active in helping you construct this. I want to say, hey, I don't know the answer to that question, but I know someone who does, and it would be great for you to talk to them. Let me make the introduction for you. I want to make sure you've got a really robust constellation of people in your developmental network. So be strategic about looking for a variety of folks. One mentor probably can't do it all for you, and I think the stronger your constellation, the better it'll be for you.
And I would also add, you need to think about that both from the mentor and the mentee perspective, because again, we're all going to be mentors and mentees at the same time. And so thinking about your constellation of mentors, you should do the same thing about the people that you're mentoring, right? So think about who's in your network there. The other great thing about mentoring and creating these constellations within your organization is we create this culture, this inclusive culture that really engages employees and makes them want to feel like they belong, and this is a great place to be, and it really leads to higher retention, right? So a lot of great outcomes there. The other aspect that we find is really important in the research when we think about mentoring relationships that gets kind of glossed over is this reciprocal nature, and the fact that the best mentoring relationships out there are those that are mutual. And what do we mean by that? Those are the ones where, again, there can be learning going both directions. right? And that there's this kind of reduced power dynamic. We don't feel, it's not as much of the guru hierarchical model of mentoring, right? That we approach it from a power down perspective, and I share in your perspective, and I want to hear what you have to say if I'm your mentor, right? I'm even asking for it, right? I want to hear that. And that helps the mentor in being better in doing their mentoring, as well as learning a little bit more about other parts of the organization, people's experiences and perspectives, and makes them a better leader as well. So that reciprocal nature is really important to include there. The other thing that's really obvious, I think, is that the business case for the mentoring and why mentoring and sponsoring is so vital for an organization is the outcomes related to whatever your business model is. If it's profit and loss, if it's just making better decisions, if it's creativity, if it's innovation, whatever level it's at, right, that we know that having more diversity, including gender diversity, at every single level of our organization and leadership makes a difference. It improves us all the way across the board. And the research continues to pile up here and to show us this. Yet we still find that we're not being as leveling the playing field for everybody in our organization, right? And making sure that everybody gets the same opportunities for sponsoring and mentoring, right, in the same way. That some people get more of it, some other groups don't get as much of it. So this exclusion still exists out there, and this leads to, again, you see lots of this in gender in particular, but in other inequities as well in our organizations, whether it's advancement, promotion, recruitment, retention. Again, all the metrics still show that there's exclusion out there. Really interesting, Harvard Business did a study a few years ago where they went out and they asked this across industries, 800 leaders. And they said, are you including, in this case in particular around gender, are you including women in all the important decisions you make about your company? And they asked the men this question, and the men said, 92% of the men said, yep, absolutely, we're doing that. And then they asked the women the same question. And 82% of the women said they felt excluded in one way or another for the important decisions that are being made in their organization. So often in a lot of organizations, we find there's a little bit or a lot of a disconnect here, and we really have to get to that. And Brad and I, when we're working with senior leaders, we often ask them this question. And because a lot of them will push back and say, hey, we've got this. We're working on through these efforts, and we really think we've got it. And the question is, how do you know? And what you know is what you measure and what you value. And so I think there's been a lot of great work going on here at Cisco to do some of that. And I think, again, that helps us to understand how do we know and how well we're doing at it. One of the things that we do know is that when we engage men in this conversation, the research again shows, and this is one study from the Boston Consulting Group, that shows that when men are involved in particular in gender diversity initiatives, and this applies in diversity initiatives broadly, that we see this is where the dial begins to move. We start to achieve more of the outcomes and the goals that we have for our organization. When men aren't involved, not as much, right? And is that because in some way men are better at something than at mentoring or sponsoring? No, it just happens that they tend to be there's more of them, and they tend to be more in positions of power and influence, right? Where we can actually move the dial and make a difference there. When we were doing our research for Athena Rising, it was really interesting because one of the things we wanted to try to understand is why aren't more men engaged in mentoring and sponsoring, and in particular around gender, but also in other areas of inclusion and diversity. And it was interesting, there were a lot of different reasons out there, and you've probably heard a lot of these, and it's pretty clear that unconscious bias or implicit associations play into this, right? Our perceptions of how we see each other in the workplace. And if you think about it from a mentoring or a sponsoring perspective, that if I look at a particular group of people and I think, she's probably not leader material, she might not be strong enough, right? All of these stereotypes that are out there, that she's a risky investment, I might lose her because she's going to go off to have a family, or, oh my God, one guy said, a ticking time bomb of maternity. Like she's going to suddenly start popping out babies. And it's, and we laugh about it, but there are these thoughts, these perceptions that are going on in the back of people's minds. And it's just good, right, to disrupt a little bit of the status quo here and to call it out, right, and to make it aware, and we can deal with that. The other thing is that sometimes some men have a little bit of anxiety around professional relationships in particular around gender with women at work. And we had a number of men talk a little bit very openly about this, and the fact that, they said, we have a script that we learned when we were boys, in how to have relationships with, you need this up? Oh, okay, sorry. And how to have relationships with important family members like our mothers. You know, I have a sister. I know what that looks like. Today, I have a wife, and I know what that relationship looks like. And I even have a daughter, and I know what that relationship looks like. So very comfortable because society and my family socialized me on what that script would look like in that relationship. But when it comes to a professional, intimate, non-sexual relationship at work, sometimes men, right, they feel a little uncomfortable with that and they're a little anxious. And what do we do when we get anxious? We avoid, right? This is the discomfort, the uncomfortableness, and we go to the sidelines and we stay away from it, right? So another reason why, in particular, we find, in some cases, men need to be aware of how this is affecting their relationships. The last one, obviously, perceptions about, concerns about how their peers or their colleagues at work might consider what's going on here if I start, again, suddenly mentoring, sponsoring a junior woman at work. Might give some people something to talk about. Other men express concerns, in particular, around how their spouses, if they had a wife, what she might think about them, spending a lot of time in particular. And so perceptions come into play a lot, and something that we have to acknowledge and make sure that we're thinking about how can we overcome some of that. We'll talk a little bit more. The last thing I'll leave you here is this is just recent research that came out. This avoidance, right, the reluctance of engaging in mentoring and or sponsoring, right, it leads to what we see already happening, where we tend to focus on people who look like us, right? If you look inside your network of friends, of colleagues, of mentors, of mentees, and it starts to look like this, right? These are some of the reasons why, you know, again, where we're comfortable are the people that tend to look like us. So we have to get outside of our comfort zone just a little bit and be more intentional and deliberate about who, right, we're investing in.
I also want to just say, you know, this is a room primarily full of women, and we're talking about, you know, maybe initiating mentorships. Dave and I wrote about cross-gender mentoring, especially how guys can get better at this. I just want to share with you that, you know, the data actually is pretty clear right now. When a woman has a male mentor, she makes more money and gets more promotions. And is that because dudes are better mentors? No, we're not. Guys are often just power holders, right? They often hold more positions of, you know, social capital and leadership, and they can open doors and sponsor. So that seems to be the explanation, but it is good to be aware of that. I'll also just say there's an unfairness because, you know, you look at the numbers, right? As you go up in leadership in any organization, you find fewer and fewer senior women, right, in leadership. And so if your expectation is that I'm going to have a same gender mentor, that puts an awful lot of pressure on the few senior women you have available to mentor every woman. And it's sort of not fair. It leads to burnout for your women in leadership. And for all of these reasons, guys have got to lean in and become more engaged. And I would encourage you to reach out and really engage cross-gender, because I think it's good for both participants here. I want to say we're going to kind of lean in now to what great mentors do, great sponsors do, and kind of share you some best of from our book, Athena Rising, and some other research on mentorship. And also want to leave you with each kind of message we give about how great mentees sort of approach each of these and how you can elicit mentoring and kind of what your role might be here. So just so you're aware, when we wrote Athena Rising, we wanted to write about how guys can be more effective mentors for women. When we would share this with people, what we were working on, they would stop and go, "You realize you're two dudes, right?" And we'd say, "Yeah, we realize that." But it was a good point because, you know, we wanted to have the voices of women. So that's really what Athena Rising is. We went out and interviewed lots and lots of women in different organizations and professions, and we asked them, "Did you have male mentors? Most had." And we said, "Well, what worked? What worked for you and what didn't?" And so that's really sort of what we want to pass on to you. Okay. All right, so we're just going to kind of jump in with some of the things that really kind of emerged. So number one was sort of this sort of thoughtfulness about kicking off the relationship. This is especially important if you get paired, right, in a formal program of some sort, because there's going to be a moment where you're going to have these formative initial conversations, and it's a great place to be ready as a prospective mentee to talk a little bit about what you're hoping for, right? What do you imagine might be really useful for you in a mentorship or a sponsoring relationship? Be willing to kind of, think that through. Mentors, talk loud, or move this, okay, yeah, all right, thank you. I have a clinical psychologist voice too, which makes it hard. So, and I want to also just share, in terms of the data on what makes a mentorship fly versus die on the vine, there's really clear data right now that shows that the one variable that really makes a difference, frequency of interaction, especially in the first several months. Do you actually get together? Do you talk? Do you engage? And if you do, that mentorship is likely to really take off. If you don't see each other, if your meetings are really rare, you're missing an opportunity, and we just find those relationships don't take off. So prospective mentees, if you're not hearing from your mentor, reach out, take initiative, don't miss that opportunity. Often he or she is really busy, not deliberately neglecting, and if you'll prompt them a little bit, often you're going to get this back on track. And then if there are things that matter in terms of boundaries or parameters, when do we talk, where do we meet, what's sort of the expected frequency, then these are good things to talk about early on. So one of the things that often comes up is, here I am, I'm a prospective mentee. I am aware that this person could be a terrific mentor, and I'm just not sure how to get this going, right? What's that sound like? How do I initiate it? So we're going to do one exercise with our time with you today, and this is it. So what we're going to ask is that you all kind of just cluster up into some very small groups, maybe turn around, maybe groups of 3 to 5, 3 to 6, and I'm going to ask that one of you volunteer to be a prospective mentee. You have to do this really quickly. And then look in your little cluster, your little group, and pick a mentor, right? And this is just for practice, and initiate that conversation. I really like this person to be my mentor. I'm just not sure how to get the conversation going. Try it out. Everyone else in that little group is going to listen and watch, and then quickly give you some feedback. How did that land, right? And the prospective mentor, how did that land with you when that person approached you that way? Give them some honest feedback. Have a quick conversation, and then we'll share some best practices about breaking the ice, okay? So we're only going to give you a couple minutes for this, so quickly find your little group, some brave person, be a prospective mentee, and go for it. All right. Okay, another 30 seconds. Give some feedback, and we'll come back. Okay, why don't we start coming back here?
You know you've lost your audience when.
A lot of good debriefing.
I know.
Wow. All right. Nicely done. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Free drinks?
So
No.
So I'm hoping that was kind of an interesting challenge, and thank you to all of you who volunteered to do that. And I hope you got some interesting and useful feedback about how it landed or what it sounded like. Now it's the same issue when it's the mentor, right? I see this really talented person, and I want to start a mentoring conversation. I'm sometimes not sure how to do that. So let us just test a couple, and I think you'll see the equivalent with what it's like for the mentee. So yeah, I've noticed this dude, and he seems really qualified and impressive. So I'm just trying to think about how to initiate this. So how's this sound? I'd like to mentor you. Do you see the problem here? And you know, it's creepy, first of all, and he has no idea what I'm asking. But do you see the problem when you flip it too, and you're the prospective mentee, and you start with that? Would you be my mentor? Sheryl Sandberg, right down the road at Facebook, says this happens to her all the time when she's speaking. People come up to her and say, "Will you mentor me?" And she's like, "Oh, what a mood killer, right? I don't know this person," and usually she is asking for a relationship. So what we're finding is much more helpful to be very locked on and specific, right? I'm going to make a very specific ask. So I saw you present at blank. I was so interested in what you had done in your career. I wondered how I might do something like that. Am I standing in the wrong place again?
I don't know.
Would you ever be willing just to have coffee with me and let me hear how you did that? Okay, very specific ask, right? And as a prospective mentor, I'm like, wow, sure, that's not hard. And then human psychology kicks in, and maybe that leads to another conversation, another coffee. And what we find is the more exposure, the more I like you, right? And that's just how relationships work. So if you can just start with a small, very specific ask, you're likely to really get some traction with somebody. So, you know, again, if this is a talented younger person, Dave, I saw you present in that meeting yesterday. Really, really impressed, and I want to make sure we keep you here at Cisco. If you would ever like to stop by and just, you know, discuss your thinking about career, I'd be delighted to do that.
Will you buy me coffee?
So you know, probably he gets it now, and it's up to him. I'm not going to stalk him. You know, I've made the offer, and now it's kind of in his court. Okay.
I would just like to add, and you probably saw this in a lot of your groups, that sometimes you don't even use the word mentor or mentoring or mentorship, right, in the ask. And I would just like to point that out because Brad and I have this conversation a lot of times in workshops that sometimes it's interesting because even though we're here today talking about how to have a more mutual, reciprocal relationship in terms of mentoring, that we still have in the back of our mind, mentoring can kind of be a little bit of a loaded word, right? There's a little bit of a power dynamic to it that we all kind of feel it and sense it, but it's a kind of a big ask no matter which direction you're going in a lot of different ways. And so we want to be careful with how we do that. And so people will find all kinds of different ways to work around the language, right? It tends to be a little bit loaded that way.
That's a good point. Yeah. So I want to say something about starting out. I mentioned the frequency issue is crucial. We see the data over and over for this. Here's a word for mentors. If you're committing to being a mentor for somebody, you've got to commit the time, right? And you've got to commit the opportunities to have uninterrupted sort of listening time. You know, I've been doing this for years, and I don't have mentoring conversations usually in my office. If I'm going to do that, I usually say, hey, let's go to the coffee shop, you know, right down on the corner. When I get away from my office where people are dropping by all the time, phones ringing, it's busy, and I can just sit for 45 minutes and listen, I really feel like I'm able to offer some great mentoring. I can listen, I can focus, I can hear about their career interests, and I think you have to be really strategic. So because of my mentoring, I've created a whole generation of caffeineaholics because it's all about coffee, but you'll have to decide what's your strategy for this. Mentees, you also have to make the time, right? Nothing is as disheartening as a potentially interested mentor when I reach out and you don't reciprocate, or you say you're busy, or you don't make the time. So you need to be willing to do this. In this era where, sometimes cross-gender meetings or coffees or lunches are uncomfortable or people aren't sure about that in the workplace, I will just tell you as a clinical psychologist, there's only one treatment for that. It's exposure therapy. You need to do it more, practice it. Go have coffee with someone of the other gender until you're not anxious anymore. And I would say the more you do this and have, this intentional, wide group of people who don't look like me that I meet with frequently, there's just no story here, right? If I never mentor women and I suddenly start meeting with only one junior woman a lot, that looks creepy. And I've done that to myself. But if I meet with a lot of men and women and it's just part of my brand, I just think you avoid the gossip and the weird perception. So be very deliberate. Yeah. Okay.
All right, really interesting. We're going to go through a little bit, some more in our research, specific things that came out. One of them in particular was around this notion of humility in mentoring relationships. And it's really interesting to see that almost every single woman responded with the fact that their mentor approached the relationship with just a ton of humility, right, in the way they came at it. And what do I mean? I mean that they talked about it in terms of either gender or cultural humility, in the sense that, hey, just because you're different from me doesn't mean that I can't learn from you, and right, I haven't walked a mile in your shoes, and so I have something to learn from your experiences, and I want to understand your perspective and really gain a lot from that. And the mentors talked about it from really approaching the relationship from a learning orientation, right, this growth mindset. And it really makes a difference in the way that we approach. And you can see that it also gets back to the mutual nature, the reciprocal nature of a mentoring relationship that we're looking for, right? Because it starts to power down. We get to the level playing field in the relationship. One of the really interesting sidebars we got out of the research when we were doing the interviews with the male mentors, and we didn't ask them this question, but by the time we got to the end of the interview with every single one of them, they would tell us, I think I feel a little bit guilty about this. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, well, I feel like I got more out of this mentoring relationship than she did. But it's really powerful, though, to think about how these very, very senior men, in this case, were talking about, hey, I learned so much, right, from mentoring somebody who was different from me, right? And I think it's a really powerful lesson, a leadership lesson that we all need to take away from that. The other thing that almost all the women told us was that the number one skill that they most appreciated from their mentor was their listening skills. And the number one thing that they wish their mentors would improve upon even more was their listening skills. And what do I mean by that? Well, they meant their listeners, they took the time, as Brad was talking about, they took the time, whether it was kind of clearing the calendar or getting away from the office or putting the phone away or whatever that was, right, to really focus in, right, to really learn and hear you and meet you where you are right now so you could be your whole self, right? And we could hear about all of that right now, right here. And not make assumptions, and we'll talk more about assumptions, but not make assumptions about who you might be or what you might want in the relationship. And so listening really becomes powerful. And then there's another one that it's a little bit of a gender stereotype to some extent, but because I think that it does apply to men in maybe a few more cases, but also I think we find it with very powerful women too, is that sometimes as leaders, we're all managers, we're all problem solvers. And sometimes in a mentoring relationship, if we approach that from the perspective that I have something to fix in my mentee, that we can sit there and we can listen to our mentee, right, and be good listeners, but at the same time, we're really listening to figure out she or he is going to tell me what they need fixed. And we don't need to be problem solvers in that way. Sometimes our mentees really need a lot of other things in that relationship. It might just be that, hey, you belong here. It's a great idea that you have, and you should go forward with that, right? They need affirmation of who they are and what they're doing. Maybe not so much that they need to be fixed. So listening skills are really important.
So we also love this metaphor of Michelangelo, and I think a really great mentor channels Michelangelo. Michelangelo was a very humble person as a sculptor, and he would actually say, when I'm sculpting and the sculpture emerges like David or Moses, I'm as surprised as everyone else. I had no idea what was in there. I just knew there was this ideal form, and my job was to clear out all the detritus and stuff on the outside so that could emerge. Great mentors, I think, have that same attitude. I won't make assumptions about you, what you want to be, where you want to go in your career, what it looks like when your whole self is showing up in the workplace. I don't know that, but I want to create an environment where that can happen, right? By the way, I'll just say that great relational partners, spouses, others, do this for each other, right? I want you to sort of be your best self. I want to hear what that sounds like, and then I want to find ways to affirm that, right? Create opportunities for you to be that, whatever that looks like. So mentees, I would say that you've got to be willing to do this work and start to really focus in on what is my career dream? What does that look like? What would it look like 15 years from now? Would I be at Cisco? Would I not? Well, if everything worked perfectly for me, what would that look like? And then I need to be able to courageously share that with my mentor so my mentor can start doing this with me, really collaboratively.
On the beach in Hawaii.
On the beach.
I think in 15 years, that's a good one.
So want to also just mention, this is ubiquitous. I'm guessing there's nobody in the room here who, when you got hired at Cisco, you thought for a little while, they made a mistake. I'm not very competent. They don't realize it, and they're all going to figure it out and show me to the exit. Right? We all feel that way. We all feel like imposters. And I'll just tell you, every time you promote, you're going to feel this again, at least for a little while. I can't believe they promoted me, and I don't feel competent, and I'm carrying the sense of being an imposter. This is something to bring up with a mentor. And mentors, you've got to be attuned to this. You have to look for it, right? Your mentee is really self-downing, hard on themselves, and you need to push back on this and say, what's going on? We are so lucky to have you here. What are you telling yourself? Because I'm guessing it's something about being an imposter that's not true. So can we talk about that? Mentees, you got to be willing to share this. You feel like an imposter, be honest with your mentor so your mentor can address this a little bit.
And in organizations in particular where there's not a lot of people who look like you, right, this could be even more prevalent, right? So as, again, mentor and mentee, this is important to recognize and to bring it up and talk about it in the relationship, right, in a way that's comfortable for you.
Great mentors don't make assumptions. And let me just give you a quick example of this. This came from our book, Athena Rising. We got to interview Janet Petro, who runs a Kennedy Space Center, a really remarkable person. And she raved about this guy. And so we got an interview with him. He was her mentor, Robert Lightfoot. He was a director of NASA when we got the interview with him. Excuse me. And he said, well, I'm honored that Janet thought a lot of me, but just let me tell you where I got it wrong early in my career, a lot, mentoring. And it was making assumptions, especially about women. And he said, I'll give you an example. We had an executive position at NASA. I was on the hiring committee. On our final meeting before we offered the job, it was clear the top candidate was a woman. And as we're sitting around the table all giving our final 2 cents, I wanted to show how gender savvy I was. So I said, this job involves a lot of travel. And she just had a baby. And he said, luckily a woman was sitting across from me with daggers coming out of her eyes. And she said, Robert, I'm pretty sure she knows the job involves travel. And I'm certain she knows she had a baby. So how about if she's our candidate, how about if you don't decide for her? And he said it was such a light bulb moment, right? I was trying to get it right, trying to be gender sensitive, and I was making assumptions. And I was failing to ask her. So this is really important. In mentoring, you've got to listen to the mentee. Don't make assumptions. Mentees, you've got to be willing to share, where you want to go and what that dream looks like. So, and if somebody does make assumptions about you, you got to be willing to call it out. I really wish you would have checked with me before you made that decision about my future. I want to practice something very quickly with you. Dave and I are currently working on our next book, which is about male allyship in the workplace, and especially how men can be better allies for women at work. And there's a lot of connection with mentoring here too. I think if you're mentoring somebody, you've got to be really aware about how things are going in the workplace, and especially if there's lack of fairness or equity, I think you got to be willing to call this out. So I want to practice just one exercise with you, just to show you how easy it is to be a disruptor, right? And so here's a scenario. We know that when you're in a meeting and maybe somebody says something that's biased or sexist or maybe even a little harassing, maybe it was a joke or something that's not very funny, people freeze, right? Oh, that was inappropriate or that was wrong, but no one says anything. And it's kind of bystander paralysis, and it happens all the time. So how do you disrupt that? We really talk about the 2-second rule. Remember when you're kids and you drop something on the floor? 2 seconds, I got it, it's good. Sort of the same thing with disrupting bias. And so we want you to practice and just see how easy this is. So you're going to be coming into a meeting. There's 2 guys already in the meeting room, and we're having a side conversation before the actual meeting starts. If you hear something that doesn't land the right way with you, I'm going to challenge you to do this disruption called ouch. I just want you to yell ouch, right? You got to be committed, all right? So if you hear something that doesn't fit, it doesn't feel right for you, got to be a disruptor. So yell ouch, okay? So Dave, I saw that you had a new hire in your department, Shonda. I think her name
she's
is.
awesome.
I saw her present, earlier this week. She's a rock star.
Yeah, we were really lucky to hire her.
Yeah, well, she's great.
She nailed it.
When she talks, she could smile a little bit more. Nice, good.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Sometimes she can be a little abrasive.
Yeah, we've got a job coming up on the international side. It involves some travel. Is she married?
Great. Yeah, I think she is. I think she has kids.
Oh, then forget it. Okay, yeah.
Well, I mean, you do know she is kind of easy on the eyes.
So you see how easy that is. And then the last part of this, being a disruptor, especially if you're a guy, you can't say, oh, hey, Rachel here's in the room. There's women around. No. You need to say, that didn't land the right way with me, right? Please don't do that. Or we don't do that here at Cisco. I got to own it, right? If I'm going to be an ally, I got to own that disruption. Okay.
We're down to 5. So one of the things, this comes up in mentoring a lot, and a lot of.
Yes.
Okay, so you guys came from the military background.
Yeah.
So did my dad, retired Marine colonel.
Yeah.
So you're of a certain age when you're used to that kind of conversation when you were growing up. When you're dealing with gentlemen who say, well, it's how I was brought up, it's you're too sensitive, and really trying to change that mindset. How do you recommend we, like somebody of my generation, help somebody? I'm done.
Could you repeat the question for people online?
Yeah.
You want to repeat it?
So
I'm going to take the questions at the end. So this was an exception. I can feel the passion. So.
Yeah. So the question is sort of, what do you do when you get kind of the pushback, the boys will be boys, right? Or that's just his generation, or
politically correct.
It's just locker room banter. Don't overreact to that. I think this happens, right? It does. And I think it gives sort of privilege or excuse for sexist, harassing, biased behavior. And I don't know how other people respond to this, but we are pretty much no tolerance for that. And I would call that out. I would say that may be your generation, but we don't do that here. And I would be pretty firm. And I don't think you can allow, sort of this excuse related to that's how I was brought up, or no, not here in the workplace, not okay. I think you have to be zero tolerance.
And the research, and the research supports that too, right? That in particular with men, we find that the recognition or awareness, of something being harassing or demeaning or sexist in nature is really low in a lot of cases. And even when it is recognized, that there's an assumption that all the other men in the room, so a lot of times as men we find ourselves in spaces where it's just us. The assumption is that everybody else in the room has the same high level of acceptance of that. And so therefore we're all going to sit there and be quiet, right? Not say anything. And so it takes the one person, right? Just takes the one person to say something, right? And then own it, right? And then the personal accountability piece is really important, that that it offends me, or I don't appreciate that, and here's why, and explain to you in your own words. And I think you have to find your own story that helps to explain that, because otherwise it comes off as being maybe a little bit inauthentic in some way there. So it's really important, and we know that from an ally perspective in particular, it's really important because it raises the level of awareness for everybody else in the room. And then in particular, when it comes to gender, when these things are said, often we find that there's a lot of self-blame and self-shame, in particular for women, and it reduces that, right? And it empowers as well, right? We find our empowerment to do all of us to act. And then Brad, I say something, and then Brad's like, yeah, me too, right? In this case, that I don't appreciate that either. It offends me, and here's why, right? But it is important we do say so. So one of the things that does come up is questions and comments about, in particular about how do we deal with work life, whether you call it integration, prioritization, balance, but issues around work life, right, in a mentoring relationship. Because sometimes as a mentor, you may feel like, I don't really have the background to answer that question or to give you guidance. And again, mentoring relationships are about the whole person, not just about one specific area. And so this is, I think, a great place to, as a mentor, to help and trying to normalize challenges, right? And you can, in some cases, if it's appropriate, you can self-disclose and say, hey, here's a particular issue I had when I was coming up through the ranks, or I have today even, maybe, right? About kind of work life and the challenges that go on there, and here's how I deal with that. And so self-disclosing can be one of those things you can do, but try to normalize and realize that, hey, we all have unique challenges when it comes to work and family, and that we have to find a way to do that. And then think about, as a mentor, what are the resources that I can bring to bear, that I can recommend to my mentee. And the final thing I would say is, if you just really don't feel qualified to help, is this is a great place to build the constellation, build the network. Reach into your own network and say, but I can connect you to somebody else that I really value and respect, and I think they can probably help you out a little bit more than I can, and connect them, right? And connect them into that. And the last thing that I think we have to remember, that as both mentors and mentees, is that we have to talk about these issues. They can't be the things that we hide out there, right? That work and family is important, and we have to be there and be doing those things. And as allies for the men in the room, the first thing we have to do is be equal partners at home, because being equal at work starts with being equal at home. So do the dishes, okay? All right, we're going to finish up right now, but we want to leave you with a little bit of homework to take away, and to think about, what are some of the things I could start with today? Just little things that I could start with today, this week, and I could think about being more intentional and deliberate and applying some of what we've talked about, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk more about it in the panel here in just a second. But one of the first things is, like Brad alluded to with the career dream, is start thinking about that. What is that? Can I articulate that in a way to my mentor, if you're the mentee, that he can do something with, or she can do something with, right? That they can really begin to help me. But I have to begin to articulate that. And I can remember being a young 20-something and thinking about, could I really articulate my career dream back then? I don't know how good I was going to be at doing that, right? And I'm not sure that I was really helping my mentors give me good advice and good guidance, because I hadn't thought about it enough. When you go to your mentor, just like you saw in the ask you did before, it helps to be really clear about what you're asking for, right? And think and contextualize it, right? Get to the specific, make it as specific as possible as you think about how you're doing that. And then finally, make sure you're ready to engage, right? And you're committing to, this is a relationship, you're committing to this, right? And the same thing with sponsoring, right? When you're entering into a sponsorship, you're advocating, you're all in and advocating for your sponsoree. So make sure you're ready and you're prepared. With that, I think we're out of time, and we want to get to the panel here today. So we're gonna stop and reset, and I'll turn it back over to Maria. Thank you.
Let's give them a big round of applause.
So thank you again. I thank you. We appreciate all that you've shared. It's very obvious that the passion and the commitment is there, and we look forward to reading your second book on the allyship. Appreciate the early question a few minutes ago as well on just being able to tee up the importance of what we need to be mindful of as individuals in this company. I think it's really a big effort around what we're doing inside of Cisco on the topic of conscious culture, ensuring that everybody knows that they have a role and be able to say something. If you see something, say something, and make sure that you all have the responsibility in creating an environment where people are respected. And so there's a lot of efforts happening there here at Cisco around that piece of it, and it's critical to the conversation. So I'm glad to see that the question came up and that we could, organically address it through this conversation. Now with that, we're going to go into a panel. We have about 15, 20 minutes. We're mindful of people's calendars and whatnot, but Serpil, if you would join us up here and for the questions.
So you need to speak to the microphone for the questions because the room is full. We're going to have someone running around for you.
So we need a
be
mic runner.
mindful.
We will share. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Why don't we stand over here, Serpil, you and I, so we're out of time. I will stand. I'm too short. I will. Okay. All right. So why don't we go? I was looking at the questions that were submitted through the registration process. A lot of the questions have been answered through your presentation. So I'm not going to go through many of these. I see the passion in the room, and I'm sure we have some questions online. So if you have a question, let's start with your question.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much, everyone. It's more of a comment. I'm delighted to see the change in attitude because a couple decades ago, early in my career, when I asked people, executives, about would you be my mentor, the answer would be something like, oh, great idea, go find somebody else. They were all busy, they all had deadlines, they had quotas to meet, they were trying to balance family and life, and I understand that too.
Thank you.
I'm
going to ask everyone to ask short questions instead of comments. Okay. Finish up. Okay.
Hi, this has been wonderful. Thank you. There was an article in the New York Times a few months ago about a backlash that's been caused by the Me Too movement where men are opting out of mentoring women because they don't want to be perceived as hitting on them or anything like that. And so I'm just wondering how you advise companies like Cisco to encourage men to lean into those relationships rather than to lean out of them as a result of the Me Too movement.
I'll start. Yeah, so thank you. Great question, about the Me Too and about men leaning out. And both Bloomberg and Lean In have done huge surveys recently showing, that's exactly what's happening. 60% of men in corporate America now a little less likely or comfortable to mentor women or have coffee or lunch with them. So I think part of what's happened is a false narrative around Me Too, right? It's been twisted. Me Too is about women asking to come to work and not be assaulted or harassed. It's a super low bar for guys, super low. But somehow the narrative has been shifted to women are dangerous, stranger danger. I can't have coffee with them because it's risky. Men have got to push back on that because it's ridiculous. And if you have anxiety about this, you need to do the exposure therapy, right? Have more lunches, more coffees. I think it's on your shoulders. You have to do that. I think companies can really value cross-gender mentoring and sort of have it be an expectation. I think that people in leadership should be doing an audit of themselves and be accountable. Look at who you're sponsoring and mentoring. Do they all look like you, right? And if that's the case, why is that? And why are you avoiding certain groups? And I think it's an ethical, moral issue, but it's also a bottom line issue because it affects companies. When there's not good cross-gender, cross-race collaboration going on, we find companies they're not as competitive or creative. They don't make as much money. So there's a business case and a moral case here, I think.
So thank you again for a wonderful presentation. So in your research, have you come across men asking women for mentorship? Because I feel like when I ask men, and I've had a lot of men mentors, they think like me. They act like me. So I wish that I had some women whom I could reach out to, but almost all of them seem to be busy and overloaded. So what has been your experience?
Yeah, so there's a couple pieces to this. That's a great question. I really appreciate you asking that. So one of the things that I think is really important for everybody to understand is, so we talked about the benefits for women in particular being mentored by men, right? What about the male mentors, right? And oh, by the way, if you're a male mentee being mentored by a senior woman, what about the benefits there? And they're across the board, right? It's all the same benefits for men who are being mentored by women. One of the interesting differences is that this goes for both the junior men and the senior men who are mentoring, is that we find that besides one of the really interesting ones is and this gets at the diversity of perspectives as you're widening your constellation, your network, is you get this increased access to information in parts of the organization you would not have otherwise had. Information is power. I don't need to tell Cisco that, right? Information is power. Oh my God, right? As a leader, that is so critical. You're also widening your network. In some cases, this is widening it outside the organization, or it might be to other parts of the organization. Again, making you a better leader and manager. The really great one that we love, and this goes across the board for whether you're a junior man or a senior mentor, male mentor, is that we find, the research shows this, and we found it in ours as well, is these men have increased interpersonal skills, enhanced interpersonal skills, better empathy, higher EQ. Oh my God. This is such a game changer, right? As we think about this for junior men being mentored by women as well as the male mentors, we're making such a difference to the culture and to the quality of our work out there. So important. And then the last thing of that is that, oh, by the way, when your EQ improves at work, guess what? You take it home. You don't just leave it at work. You take it home, and you're a better partner. You're a better parent, right? And I can't think of a better outcome than that.
Okay, so one more question in the room, and then we'll go to online.
Thank you for the presentation. So sometimes in a big company like Cisco, we have our mentors at a different location, like in a different time zone. So do you have like any tips of how we should collaborate with them, because we don't get a lot of face-to-face time with them? Thank you.
Yeah, that is an excellent question too. So the whole issue of what if we're not face-to-face? What if we're not co-located? Can you have a mentorship or a sponsorship when that's the case? And the data is really pretty clear. Yes, you can if. And the if is what strategy do you use? So if it's just telephone or email, we find that relationships are not as effective. And that's probably straightforward because you're missing all the interpersonal cues and all those things that really go into a relationship. If you're using really good video conferencing, there's almost no difference. And as a clinical psychologist, what really fascinates me is the data on telepsychotherapy also shows that it's just as effective as in person as long as you're using the video conferencing. So I can just tell you psychotherapy works as well. Mentoring will work as well as long as you're using, genuine video where you can actually get all those interpersonal cues. But again, you got to make the commitment. It's not okay just to say, hey, we have teleconferencing. Are you using it? Are you getting together frequently? That's going to be crucial. Oh, do we?
Yeah. Yeah, and it helps when you do get the opportunity, or if you can start it off with an in-person, that's great. It doesn't have to be that way. Or if you can find or make opportunities, right, to connect in person. We're always looking to do that, and we get chances to travel, whether it's the mentor or the mentee.
So we have a question on WebEx, but we just want to let you know that we have about 140 people tuning in right now. So, yay! The question is, what about outside the workplace? When you are, for example, like at lunch or dinner with male coworkers whose comments about a female in the restaurant who's not a coworker make you uncomfortable, how do you deal with that?
Well, I think that goes back to a lot of what we talked about with the question earlier we had, and I think that again you have to call that out. And one of the interesting things about this, so there's kind of the ally perspective, which doesn't get at any particular necessary relationship that you have, but then there's also the mentoring side too, right? So if there's a mentor and that there's a relationship there, that they have to kind of be that stand-up person, right? The person that they are in the relationship, and if they allow these kinds of things to happen outside the relationship, people are watching. People are listening, right? And if you're the mentee and you see I see my mentor saying these kinds of things or behaving in a way like that outside, I'm like, I don't necessarily trust you anymore or respect you. And if nothing else, what we know about great mentoring relationships, they're based on trust and respect. And so I think that, again, as mentors, when we take on that mantle, we have to think about, all right, I've got to be consistent, right? I've got to be consistent and brave in my action all the time, 24/7. I don't get to take it off when we go to dinner, right, and be somebody else suddenly.
Yep.
I think the one piece that always comes to mind when people ask me that same question all the time, it's like there's something to be said about being authentic, and it's like you're not one person here at work and then you go somewhere else and you flip the switch and you can be a total jerk, right, or be totally disrespectful. Like, there are core things to being human and core things to who you are. And I know that people usually use that term of flipping the switch. I know I have a switch of what I can do in the community from a culture perspective, but that doesn't mean that I'm in that culture component and I'm no longer respectful or no longer, authentic with people, because there's a core to who you are. And so I think that if it's important to you, it's important to you whether you're here in Cisco or whether you're at home or whether you're somewhere out in the community, because it's core to who you are.
See, I think as a man, there are some things that we say which are obvious. I mean, you can say those. But like this gentleman in your example who asked, is she married or something like that, right? The NASA chairman. There are things that we may say which we don't know offends the other gender, and being called out, I would like to be called out so that I can correct myself and I can learn to be more sensitive. So when you're calling out, you're not necessarily just being the bad person. You're actually helping the other people, get that social skill. So call out.
And I actually think that's a great plug for MFI, because a lot of this is you don't know, and you get in a conversation with somebody. One, it's with other people who've had that experience. Someone has called that out, and so you become more aware of it. But then also, I find that other people, once they find out you're involved in the community, they feel more comfortable coming up to you and saying, ouch, or that wasn't accepting. So make the steps. If you want to get more aware, you won't be perfect day one, but it will get there.
I'll just add one more thing we're finding. Confronting guys, right? Guys, male allies, have some options when that happens, right? The comment, the sexist joke, we all heard it. We all felt when we heard it. You got an option, right? So sometimes it's important as a male, when it's another guy and it's mostly guys in the room, that you call it out right there in the meeting and just say, hey, we don't do that here. You got to do it, because if you don't do that in front of everybody, people walk out of that meeting feeling like this is tolerated here, and you can't let that opportunity pass. There are other moments where a guy, maybe it's your generational guy, or someone who's just a little clueless. Maybe it's an okay thing to pull them aside and say, we have a hashtag for this, hashtag bro no. No, did you see when you said that, everyone cringed in the room. Maybe you missed that. Here's why we all cringed. Can't do that. Don't do that anymore. So sometimes you can get more mileage pulling a guy aside, but you've got to decide how to do that.
Before we get to the question, I just want to share a personal experience I had with three guys. This was last year. So one guy I was on the phone with, and he was saying that I am being too sensitive, because I was saying I don't want to work under that person. And I was stunned and I couldn't say much, but it was basically invalidating my own feelings, saying, oh, you're being sensitive. The second one experience I had is this well-meaning, wonderful engineer said, let's go out and have drinks on a weekday before the meeting next day. We had a very important meeting planned, and he said, let's go have drinks. I'm a single mom. I can't go out on a short notice. But I went there. I figured a way out. And I kept thinking, do I pull him aside and say, I know what you mean, but maybe we could have done it 15-minute pre-meeting social. So I didn't say anything to him. And then the third one is someone within my group whom I know is a very sensitive person, but I noticed something that he was doing without knowing towards me. So I waited until we completed the project. I did pull him aside and I said, look, this is how I'm feeling. Do you think maybe stop it? And he did. And the next engagement we had. So different situations, I think, warrant different types of reactions sometimes.
Okay, online question?
How do you, as men, challenge other men to step up? Do you think men listen to other men more than women?
I feel like that's a no-win answer.
Yeah. So the answer is both, right? And so one, a lot of times women don't like to hear that, hey, I'm really behind solving gender inequities and creating gender equality because I have a daughter. But the reality is that we know that personal connections are really important to the issue, and that might be through a daughter. That might be what it takes to open a guy's eyes to these things. It might be through an experience. I could tell you personally, for myself, that my wife is a retired naval officer also. I watched her go through when there weren't 20% women in the military, and I saw her experiences. And Brad's got a sister today who's serving and a rock star in the Navy, and we see her experiences, right? And so those aren't lost on us because those are really they're motivational, right? They motivate behavior and they create awareness, and now I know what it is, and I feel like I have to do something about it, right? Because that's who we are. We want to do something, and so I think the personal connections and how we see it, whether it's a family member or it's a colleague at work, somebody that we care about. Oh, by the way, female mentors for men are a really influential group. The research shows that as well, that because you might see what happens to your female mentor in a particular situation, and it's like, that's not right. That can't happen. This is somebody I respect and trust, and it can't happen. So it's really important, I think, the female part. For guys, too, right? I think there's a certain amount of who those guys are, but when another guy calls you out or says something like that, it has, again, a certain gravitas to it that, wait a minute, another guy saying something here? And it's like, suddenly it's like my own group is questioning me, and so I have to question myself at that point. There's a lot of self-reflection that will begin to happen and questioning. So I think they're both important, and I don't think we should discount either of them.
And I would just add the role modeling to that. If you're a male in leadership, especially, you can't take a day off, and be incongruent. Junior guys are always watching your behavior. How do you interact with women? Are you respectful all the time? Not when there are no women in the room, but all the time. Do you leave loudly to go take care of your kids? Or are you modeling, real allyship all the time? And I just think you have to not take a day off as a role model.
The other thing I'd say is it depends on the individual, right? So we've had a lot of stories shared in our groups that are some guys will listen to other men more. And if that's the case, go have a man to deliver the message. If it's someone that, calling them out in the middle of a meeting will resonate with them and do that, it's every one of these is a very personal experience. And so I think somewhere any business problem you're solving, you have to take that individual as a one-off and approach it the right way. So there's no silver bullet, like we said before, but acknowledging what works best could be a different method each time.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Hi, my name is Venus, and I love the title of your book, Athena, Goddess. Love that. I also wrote a book called She Rose, so I'm here for a lot of reasons, but I'm also here to support my husband, who has been very supportive of EROs, and he is a male ally. But you brought up something that I want to bring to attention, because although I have all the reasons to trust my husband, there is a collective consciousness sometimes that all men are dogs. I want to know, what have you done to comfort your spouses, to let them know that it is okay to mentor a woman who might even be attractive? How do you do that? How do you deal with those insecurities in a marriage or something like that someone might have because of a collective consciousness, or even if they have no reason to mistrust their spouse? And I want to just give a shout out to Steve, because he is an amazing ally, and I just want to say that. Okay.
I'll give a quick comment and hand to the experts, but I think the thing that really resonated was the consistency. So you don't do it at one point. If you're not doing it at home, you're not going to do it at work. And if you do a one-off where it's drinks after work and that's not a consistent thing you do, that's when problems start to rise. So as long as you keep yourself consistent, you truly believe that you live it at work, at home, everywhere that you're doing it, I think that trust builds.
Good. I like that. And I would just add, I think if you're the guy, AKA dog, in this story, I think that you can really help with this by being extremely transparent, right? Ouch. No, but I know exactly what you mean. Collective thinking about dudes not being very reliable. So my message to guys, in your office, do you have if you're married, do you have pictures of your spouse? Do you have pictures of your kids? Do you talk about them? Do you make it very public that you have commitments to your family? I think you've got to do that. And I think that messaging makes everybody more comfortable in the relationship, right? This is a guy who's really committed to his family. I don't have to worry about him maybe hitting on me. And then if I want to do something social with a mentee, what if I invite that person, it's a woman maybe, what if I invite her to join my wife and I for dinner? Let's include our spouses or partners so maybe there's less concern about that. Yeah, that's a good point.
I'll just add that as the husband to a retired naval officer, when she would go on deployment and go over the horizon for months at a time with 5,000 of my favorite male dog friends, the trust, you can't put enough capitalization, boldness, emphasis on that word, right? And reiterate that. But I also add that, to Brad's comment about inviting people, the other example I have is, so I'm up in Newport, Rhode Island. I teach at the Naval War College now, and as a civilian, and when I was at the Naval Academy with Brad, I had undergraduate students, and a lot of, I still have a lot of ongoing mentoring relationships with a lot of them because they're all junior officers out there today, and often they come back for their follow-on training or higher education up in Newport, and so they'll text me or email me and say, hey, Professor Captain Smith, I'm going to be in town and would love to get together. And I say, yeah, absolutely. And a lot of them are women. And so we'll set up a time and I'll set up dinner and my wife will be there with us and we have a great time. And it's nice because my wife can join into the conversation as well because she has a lot to add from her perspective. And so I think, just being very transparent about all of that and consistent in how you do this, I think is really important. Great question.
Well, unfortunately, our time came to an end. I just want to thank Brett and David. Thank you so much for coming today and spending this time with us. Thank you. I also want to thank MFI for collaborating with us. This was great. Hopefully, first of many. And finally, and most importantly, I want to thank Office of Inclusion and Collaboration for finding the speakers, these wonderful speakers for us, and providing the funding, and for Maria to join us today. Thank you so much. Please fill out our survey I will send out, and in August, we'll be back with another speaker. Thank you.